I lay on the icy metal surface of the surgery table, the harsh glare from the overhead lights piercing my vision. It burned so intensely that I longed to clamp my eyelids together, but restraint kept me immobile. My frame was rigid, not merely from the chill, but from an oppressive dread, like destiny's grip tightening around my throat. The heart monitor's rhythmic pulses echoed steadily, yet each one pounded in my skull like a relentless mallet. Every noise in the operating theater rang out with piercing sharpness, the chime of tools as the attendant organized them, the crinkle of documents while Dr. Evans scanned my records, and even the subdued murmurs beyond the frosted partition, where my daughter-in-law, Rebecca, stood with her folks. I strained to glance at that hazy barrier. There was Rebecca, arms folded tightly across her torso, her stare cutting like a knife's edge. She murmured to her parents, but her focus remained locked on me, issuing a silent command: commit to it immediately. Proceed without delay. I'd already penned my approval for the kidney donation to my son, Adam. That document likely sat on the physician's workstation now, bearing my quivering autograph and irrevocable pledge. The attendant clutched the injector, its contents shimmering beneath the illumination. I shut my eyes, attempting a full inhale, but my rib cage weighed like iron. My thoughts turned to Adam, my eldest boy, for whom I devoted and endured my entire existence to shield. He languished in the adjacent chamber, frail and dependent on my organ for his very life. I reassured myself, this is the proper course. Motherhood demands it. Yet why did this void gnaw at my spirit, this undefined dread? Abruptly, a booming clamor jolted me. The theater entrance flew wide, a blast of frigid draft swirling inside, rattling the equipment stand with a metallic jangle. The atmosphere thickened with suspense. I forced my lids open, struggling to raise my neck despite the bindings securing me. My 9-year-old grandson, Mario, barreled in like a tiny tempest. Mud caked his trainers, his school attire rumpled, his young torso rising and falling rapidly as he panted. A frantic attendant pursued him, yelling, "Youngster, this area is off limits, heavens, halt!" Mario ignored her, charging directly to my side, his wide, innocent orbs brimming with alarm, yet resolve. "Grandma," he uttered in a quivering tone that wrenched my core, "I must reveal the real reason Dad requires your kidney." Silence enveloped the space. The monitor's beeps amplified, threatening to shatter the quiet. A surgeon close by let surgical tongs slip, the clang against the tiled ground echoing thunderously, a stark rupture in the strain. I fixed on Mario, my cherished little one, whom I still cradled and shared bedtime tales with nightly. He clutched an outdated smartphone, his complexion ashen, gaze alight. What secret did he hold? Why declare this? My pulse surged wildly, desperate to burst free. I yearned to call out and demand answers, but my mouth parched, silencing me. Dr. Evans, the lead specialist, creased his brow. He extended a palm, directing the staff to pause. His tone resonated low yet incisive. "Speak your piece immediately." His attention shifted from me to Mario, ensnared in the bizarre tension, while beyond the pain, Rebecca pounded against it, the surface vibrating. "Ignore the boy," she screeched in a piercing, frenzied pitch. "He's merely a child, it will pass." But her composure had cracked, replaced by quaking fear, as though a buried truth teetered on exposure. Mario averted his gaze from his mother, fixating solely on me, his diminutive fingers squeezing the device until his joints blanched. He drew in a profound breath, summoning every ounce of bravery he'd ever known. I ached to rise, envelop him, assure him of safety, but immobility trapped me. Observation was all I could manage. In his tender gaze I discerned anguish, a verity straining for daylight. In that suspended moment, as anticipation gripped the room, recollections cascaded through my thoughts like a torrent, revisiting eras when I believed our kin formed an unbreakable bond of affection and fidelity. I recalled our former home in Chicago, every nook infused with the sterile aroma of cleansers, a fragrance so ingrained it faded from awareness. At 67, I often sensed far greater weariness, as though years had pilfered my vigor ages past. My husband and Joe had been confined to his bed for over a decade. He spends his days in that ancient wheelchair, the wheels groaning whenever I roll him out to the garden for a breath of fresh air. He rarely utters a word. Only occasionally does a deep sigh escape him, his stare drifting into empty space. One time, I grasped his hand and murmured, "Joe, are you weary of this existence?" He merely fluttered his eyelids, offering no reply. I'm unsure if my words reached him or if I was simply conversing with the silence. That home formed my entire universe, the spot where I nurtured my two boys, Adam and Brandon. I poured my all into giving them a leg up. I'd rise before sunrise to head to the market and peddle fresh goods. During the evenings, I'd perch there stitching outfits for folks nearby. And on occasion, I'd labor until the wee hours patching up ripped garments and rushing them over by deadline. My palms grew coarse and thickened, my fingertips perpetually stained from rummaging through the stalls. Yet I never griped. All I yearned for was a brighter path for Adam and Brandon, sparing them the hardships I'd endured. Adam, my elder boy, stood as my greatest source of pride. He was sturdy and towering, laboring on building sites and returning each evening with a booming chuckle. But lately, his vigor began to fade. It started as mere fatigue. Gradually, I noticed his complexion draining to pallor, his sockets hollowing out, and a wave of dread hit me hard when he confessed to passing blood in his urine. I pulled him close and pressed. "Adam, what's troubling you, my child? Speak to me." He only shook his head and managed a faint grin. "No need to fret, Ma. Likely just the toll of the tough labor." Rebecca, my son's wife, swept into our family like an unexpected gust. She possessed real beauty. Her words flowed with sweetness. Initially, I genuinely thought she was a gift to Adam. She tended to him with real care. She'd fetch remedies from the pharmacy, oversee his diet, and nudge him about his medications right on schedule. Folks around the neighborhood commended me. "How fortunate you are, Mrs. Jones, with a daughter-in-law like that." And I bought into it myself. Whenever I'd spot Rebecca handing Adam a steaming bowl of broth, I'd chide myself for overthinking. Still, at times I'd glimpse her icy, scheming look, like she was concealing a secret. One evening, I caught her out in the garden, murmuring urgently into her phone under the cover of night, "Relax, it's all unfolding as planned." I confronted her. "Rebecca, who's on the line this late?" She jumped, then forced a jittery laugh. "Oh, just a buddy, Mom. Head back to bed. Brandon, my younger lad, was cut from different cloth. At 26, he resides just a short walk away and earns his keep as a pipes and wires man. Brandon isn't one for chatter, but on his visits he'd invariably arrive with treats. Maybe a bunch of citrus or loaves fresh from the oven. He'd settle beside me, tinkering with the rattling attic ventilator or swapping out a bulb in the cooking area. Once he fixed me with a steady look and rumbled in his low tone, "Ma, ease up on pushing yourself so hard. I hate seeing you worn out." I just beamed and dismissed it with a flick of my wrist. "I've got this under control, Brandon. Focus on your sibling. He relies on you more." But he merely shook his head, eyes brimming with worry. Mario, my young grandson, brought the sole spark of delight amid those burdensome times. 9 years old, he'd trot over to my place with his tiny satchel slung over one shoulder. Mario enjoyed lounging in the garden, zooming around with the toy vehicles I'd snagged from a swap meet. He'd spin me yarns, pure and childlike, that occasionally stopped me cold. One day, he peered up at me with those wide saucers and declared, "Nana, Mommy chats on the phone after dark." I caught her mentioning some pills, but it didn't make sense. I forced a grin and tousled his locks. Bet she was just checking with the doc about your pa. Let it go, little one. Yet deep down, a flicker of doubt started to take root. Then came that fateful evening, flipping our world upside down. I was bustling in the kitchen, whipping up supper. The aroma of sizzling grains hung in the atmosphere when Rebecca burst through. No greeting, no grin. She planted herself there, arms folded tight. Her tone cut sharp, like a blade through tension. "Mom, the doc confirms your kidney matches best. It's on you now. You must help him." I went rigid. The utensil slipped from my grip, clattering softly into the pot. I searched her face for any trace of kindness, but found only steely resolve, bordering on insistence. "Rebecca, you know I'd move mountains for Adam," I breathed, my voice parched. She dipped her head as if victorious and pivoted away. Barely 10 minutes later, Rebecca's folks barged in like they owned the place. They claimed seats at the eating table and chimed together, "Exactly, no dodging a parent's obligation. The entire clan leans on you." I remained rooted, still clutching the spoon, trapped in the moment. Adam, slumped in his seat so gaunt I scarcely knew him, clasped my fingers. His touch was icy. "Ma," he breathed, "I know you'll pull me through." I met his gaze, those familiar eyes that, the child's eyes used to sparkle with vibrant energy, but now they mirrored only weariness and silent begging. I managed a nod, words escaping me, as the tiny space suddenly felt oppressively tight. The aroma of healing herbs wafting from Joe's brew in the corner choked the air, making it hard to draw breath. That evening, as always, I carried Joe's serving of stew to him. The creak of his wheelchair rolling over the rough floor echoed like a grim signal that the weight of our entire household rested squarely on me. I placed the bowl before him and met his gaze, yet he merely exhaled deeply, offering no words. I longed to seek his advice on whether my path was correct, but he remained still, like a mere outline in the dim light. Stepping into the yard, I found Mario engrossed with his toy vehicle. He glanced up, eyes gleaming yet shadowed by uncertainty. "Grandma," he murmured, "what if somebody falls ill from the remedies someone else gives them?" I froze in place, my pulse racing. "Why do you wonder that, little one?" I replied, forcing steadiness into my voice. Mario simply dropped his stare and continued nudging his car along, silent. Unbeknownst to me then, I teetered on the brink of a chasm, with just a handful of further moves destined to plunge me in. In the wake following that afternoon when Rebecca arrived at my home and boxed me into a corner, my existence seemed pinned down by an unseen force, denser than Chicago's sweltering midsummer blaze. I persisted in rising at dawn, heading to the market to peddle my produce and citrus, then laboring by faint lamplight to mend garments. Yet inner tranquility had vanished. With each stride and every needle's pass, doubt lingered. Was this the proper course? Must I truly surrender so much of myself? Still, Adam's desperate stare, Rebecca's cutting remarks, and the probing glances from her folks haunted me relentlessly, denying any respite. Come the following dawn, as sunlight barely crested the horizon, Rebecca appeared at my threshold. I'd barely steeped the tea. The fresh mint fragrance was starting to permeate the rooms when she barged through the door, bypassing any greeting. "Mom," she declared with ironclad resolve, "the physician warns time is running short. Your delays could put him at risk." She slapped a pile of clinical documents onto the kitchen table, crisp sheets crammed with figures and endorsements that baffled me. She jabbed at the entries like instructing a novice. "It's plain as day. You're the sole match. Nobody else can pull him through." I lingered there, gripping the steaming kettle, the scalding liquid searing my skin unnoticed. All I registered was the whisk of the broom against the floor as I began tidying, fleeing her scrutiny. "I hear you," I whispered faintly. "I'll go all out for Adam." Yet within, a massive stone pressed on me, urging a cry or flight. I swept on. The broom's scrape formed a mournful beat, aiming to muffle her insistence, but she persisted, rooted in place, eyeing me as though awaiting yet another pledge to ensure I'd never back out. Once she'd gone, I collapsed into a seat, burying my face in my palms. Memories flooded of Adam in his youth, chasing me through the stalls, clutching my hem and bursting into giggles. "Mom, when I'm big, I'll craft you a stunning home." These days he reclined frail and ashen, a faint echo of his former self. I pondered if I could bear to release him without action, but envisioning the kidney gift stirred terror, not of the procedure itself, but of an overarching shadowy pull toward the unknown that blurred my vision. That evening, Rebecca's parents dropped by. They offered a fruit-laden hamper, mangoes and oranges, setting it aside perfunctorily before claiming the prime seats in the parlor like it was theirs. Her dad, Mr. Collins, cleared his throat twice and rasped, "Back in my time, folks gave all for their kids." My own grandma parted with her fields to rescue her boy. "Your moment has arrived. Step up likewise." Rebecca's mom, Mrs. Peterson, inclined her head, her look piercing like a blade. "Deny this, and our lineage's dignity crumbles. The community will whisper, 'You neglect your boy, unworthy of motherhood.'" I perched there, fingers digging into the table's rim, trapped in gloom. I yearned to challenge why the load fell solely on me, but my lips stayed sealed. I merely bowed my head and dipped it robotically. The meal that night hung as somber as a wake. Rebecca, feigning warmth, ladled chicken onto my dish, though her tone chilled. "Mom, conserve your energy for the operation." I eyed the meat before me, appetite lost. Adam sat across, cheeks hollowed, sockets deep set. He mustered a feeble grin. "Mom, I know you'll come through for me." It echoed all those childhood rescues you'd made on my behalf. His statement pierced me like a knife. Memories flooded back of nights when his temperature soared, and I'd vigilantly dab his forehead with cool rags until dawn, or the scrapes from bicycle tumbles where I'd rush over to dress his injuries. I had been his constant protector, the parent ready to go to any lengths. Yet now, terror gripped me like never before. Brandon hunched silently at the table's edge, a mere silhouette. He ignored his food, merely swirling his utensil through the steaming broth without glancing away from Rebecca. His gaze brimmed with distrust, as though peering beyond the facade of my son's spouse. I longed to question him, but fear sealed my lips. Tension hung heavy in the air. Only the faint tinkling of cutlery on dishware broke the silence, each clink pounding against my guilt. Once the meal ended, Rebecca rose and carried Adam's dish to the sink herself, refusing any help. She scrubbed it swiftly, yet I caught her scrutinizing it intently, like she dreaded discovery of some hidden trace. Sleep evaded me that evening. In my worn-out bed, the wall clock's steady rhythm mocked me. Each tick marked the fleeting moments left for Adam. I slipped out to fetch water from the hallway. That's when murmurs drifted from Adam and Rebecca's bedroom. I froze in the shadows, breath caught. Her tone was hushed, yet distinct. "Yes, post-transplant will secure every detail. Relax. She won't have the nerve to say no." I lingered, pulse racing, palms shaking so violently that I braced against the doorframe to steady myself. Details. What scheme were they plotting? Urge surged to bang on the panel and demand answers, but just then, the door swung open. Rebecca jumped at my presence, then flashed a phony grin. "Can't sleep, Mom. I was only checking on his meds." I dipped my head and retreated, though barbs seemed to pierce my soul. Her expression, her inflection, all contrived, veiling some sinister truth. In the wake of that fraught exchange with Rebecca and her folks, existence blurred into a hazy nightmare, turning the ordinary into something alien and menacing. I pressed on with routines, vending at the bazaar, mending garments, nourishing my spouse, Joe. Yet each motion felt robotic, devoid of spirit. Sorrow weighed on me, a dark storm cloud overhead. Rebecca's declarations, Adam's desperate stare, they whirled endlessly, denying me respite. Then, one midday, as my 9-year-old grandson Mario arrived, the first fracture emerged in the barrier of faith I'd struggled to uphold. He burst in, shoes caked in dirt, fingers tacky from craft paints. He dumped his battered satchel aside, plopped onto the rug, and retrieved the toy vehicle I'd snagged for him at last year's market. I gazed at him, forcing a grin amid my turmoil. Mario had long been a spark amid my gloom, with his pure tails and bell-like giggles. But today, joy escaped him. He rolled the toy aimlessly across the tiles, expression vacant. Abruptly, he raised his eyes to mine. "Grandma," he murmured distinctly, though softly, "what if Dad's illness isn't from fate, but from someone slipping him drugs deliberately?" Shock hit me like a blow. The utensil nearly slipped from my grasp, but I clutched it, quivering. "What makes you think that, Mario?" I probed, striving for composure while my chest thundered. I searched his wide, innocent eyes, shadowed by concerns too weighty for a child. He hesitated, dropping his gaze to fiddle with the toy, fist tightening as if suppressing a secret. I yearned to embrace him, to press for details, but mustered only a shaky chuckle. "You're overthinking, kiddo. Dad's under the weather, and the physicians are handling it." My cheer felt brittle, and he offered none in reply. He merely studied me. Quietly, he gathered his bag and dashed home. Mario's inquiry rippled through my core like a pebble disturbing still waters, stirring waves of uncertainty. I remained in the modest galley, staring blankly at the produce spread out, focus shattered. Thoughts turned to Adam, the medication vials Rebecca perpetually supplied, her dominance over his every care. I reasoned it was mere paranoia. She was his partner, devoted. She'd never harm him. Yet inwardly, I sensed the discord. Later that day, Brandon arrived toolbox in tow, claiming he'd mend the erratic overhead fixture from the prior evening. I observed as he scaled the steps, adjusted fittings, and soon the fresh glow illuminated every nook. But descending with the spent bulb, he fixed me with a grave intensity uncommon for him. "Mom," he began. He spoke softly, barely above a murmur. "My sister-in-law's behavior has been really odd. I spotted some unmarked pill containers in my brother's bathroom cabinet, and she conceals them expertly." The words shocked me, causing the dish I was scrubbing at the sink to slip from my grasp and douse my shirt with suds. "What do you mean?" I managed to say, my throat tightening. Brandon climbed down from the stepladder and positioned himself right in front of me, his gaze brimming with worry. "Mom, I suspect my brother's condition isn't just some ordinary ailment. I fear that someone—" He trailed off, but his expression conveyed the unspoken dread. I remained frozen, my fingers dripping as though the ground were giving way under me. Part of me yearned to yell at Brandon, to insist he was imagining things, that Rebecca would never resort to anything so horrific. Yet the words wouldn't come. I simply stared at him. Meanwhile, Mario's earlier query replayed in my mind. What if Dad's illness stems from someone slipping him drugs? I attempted to push the thought aside, but it lingered stubbornly, like an unwelcome shadow I couldn't shake. The following afternoon, I brought some broth to Adam in the hospital. The sterile white walls and sharp antiseptic odor left me gasping for air. Adam lay there, gaunt with tubes snaking into both his arms, yet he mustered a faint grin upon spotting me. "Mom, you've arrived so soon," he murmured weakly. I set the container on the bedside table and prepared to offer him the initial sip, when I noticed Rebecca beside the bed, clutching a cup of water. She subtly flicked a oddly tinted tablet into it, a gesture so swift that only my vigilant eyes caught it. She jumped when I entered, splashing a bit of liquid onto the tiles. "What's that medication, Rebecca?" I inquired, striving for composure. Her grin appeared strained. "Just a kidney booster the physician ordered." I acknowledged her with a nod, though a shiver coursed through me. Composure eluded me entirely. Once Adam had eaten, I sought out the duty physician, a bespectacled fellow in his 40s. "Doctor, I said, my tone quivering. "Have you added any fresh kidney aids to Adam's regimen?" He seemed taken aback and flipped through the records. "No, nothing additional. His existing treatment covers it all." His response chilled me to the core. I lingered in the corridor, the overhead speakers droning announcements, but my thoughts went empty. Rebecca had deceived me. What was in that tablet? Why the secrecy? As evening fell, Mario visited my place once more. This time, he skipped his toy vehicle and settled into a seat, pulling a battered old smartphone, its display cracked, from his bag. "Grandma," he uttered steadily, though quietly, "you need to hear this." He tapped a few keys and passed it over. The audio began. Rebecca's hushed tone, unmistakable. "Post-transplant, the lab work will come back flawless. Relax, she won't have the guts to say no." The device tumbled from my grip. My limbs trembled violently. Gazing at Mario, my young grandson, I saw his eyes rimmed in red, mirroring my own terror. "I dug it up on Mom's discarded phone," he explained, his voice breaking. "Not sure what it means, but I figured you'd want to hear." I pulled him into an embrace, fighting back sobs. "Such courage, kiddo," I breathed. Inside, however, my world crumbled. Lab reports. What scheme was Rebecca plotting? Images flooded me. Adam's frailty, those anonymous vials, Brandon's wary glance, the peculiar hue of the pill dissolving in water, scattered clues of a riddle, yet they aligned gradually, sketching a nightmare I recoiled from facing. Sleep evaded me that evening. I perched in my quiet home, the clock's relentless ticking echoing like a countdown. Each moment underscored how Adam's hours were slipping away. One dawn, I headed to the hospital with a worn Tupperware of warm meal. The aroma of cooked grains and simmered beef seeped out. Adam's space felt stark and chilly, the cleaner scent overwhelming enough to constrict my lungs. I'd grown accustomed to such settings, but today it weighed heavily on me. Adam reclined with hollowed sockets and ashen skin, still forcing a weak upturn of his lips at my approach. "Mom, up with the sun," he whispered, barely audible. I placed the dish nearby and forced a grin, though turmoil churned within. The lingering uncertainties from before, Mario's probing words, Brandon's alert, all battered my thoughts relentlessly. Rebecca occupied a spot by the bed, fixated on the IV pouch releasing drops at a languid pace. She avoided my eyes. No greeting passed her lips, a mere curt bob of her head, as if I belonged there unquestioned. By the table, a petite unlabeled vial caught my attention, partially tucked beneath a wadded tissue. Plain white plastic containing odd azure tablets. I lifted it, steadying my tone. "Rebecca, what's this for?" She flinched sharply, nearly leaping, and yanked it back with such speed that I recoiled a step. She brushed it off with a grin that looked about as genuine as bargain bin makeup. "They're only vitamins, Mom," Rebecca insisted, all while the doc had ordered them to support his kidneys. I gave a nod, yet an icy shiver crept up my back. That forced smile of hers, the way she'd yanked the vial right out of my grasp, it all felt off, like she was guarding some dark mystery I wasn't meant to uncover. I settled beside Adam and began spooning food into his mouth, though my thoughts wandered far away. My mind fixated on that unmarked container, on Brandon's warnings about the odd drugs Rebecca kept concealed. I replayed Mario's naive yet piercing query in my head. What if Dad's illness stems from someone slipping him the wrong meds? Part of me ached to grill Rebecca on the spot, to yell until she spilled everything, but fear held me back. Fear that speaking up would shatter it all, costing me Adam for good. Gazing at my boy as he labored over every morsel, I murmured inwardly, "Mary, steady yourself. Uncover the facts before you act." Come midday, Brandon arrived at the facility. He strode in with his palms still smudged from the garage job, his faded tee frayed at the seams. No words escaped him. He simply perched in the shadows, eyes locked on Rebecca as she chatted with a nurse down the corridor. Once she departed, he approached and fished a tiny plastic pouch from his satchel. "Mom, check this out," he murmured, his tone strung tight like a bow. He thrust his phone toward me. The display held fuzzy shots, yet sharp enough to freeze my blood. There was Rebecca in the lot outside, slyly retrieving a compact parcel from her vehicle's rear and passing it to a stranger. The guy sported a dark coat and a hat, shadowing his features, but the meds-filled pouch in her grip stood out plain as day. "Snapped these last night," Brandon confessed, his words quivering. I trailed her 'cause her actions seemed downright suspicious. "Mom, I suspect she's harming my sibling, Adam." Words failed me. I clutched the device until my fingers blanched. The sterile tiles beneath me drained every bit of heat from my veins. "Brandon," I breathed, "you positive? Catch any of their conversation?" He shook his head, eyes bloodshot. Couldn't make it out clearly, but I witnessed the exchange, the pouch for his envelope. "Mom, that's no ordinary deal." I searched Brandon's gaze and spotted the anxiety mingled with fury. He spoke truth. Still, denial clawed at me. Rebecca was Adam's spouse, bound by vows to nurture him. How could she stoop to such betrayal? Later that day, back at the house, Mario showed up once more. No bounding energy or games this time. He just slumped in a seat, clutching his bag like a shield. "Grandma," he uttered softly yet firmly. "Listen to this." From his pack came the battered old mobile with its cracked display. His fingers shook as he hit play on a recording. Rebecca's hushed tones filled the air, slicing through me like shards of ice. "Post-transplant, the info will be locked in. Relax, that elderly lady won't push back. This payoff's worth 100-fold. Do you or I went stiff, the device clattering onto the surface as tremors seized my limbs. Turning to Mario, my young grandson, I noted his reddened eyes and the way he bit his lip to stifle sobs. "Dug it up on Mom's ancient phone," he managed, voice thick with emotion. "Not sure what it means, but figured you'd want it." I pulled him close, the ground seeming to crumble beneath us. "Such courage, Mario," I whispered. Those sobs cracked my words, and streams wet my face. Images flooded. Adam's decline, those anonymous vials, Brandon's snapshots, Mario's clip. Scattered clues, yet assembling into a grim mosaic I shrank from facing. What scheme was Rebecca weaving? What intel? What gains? And why dismiss that old woman as too timid to resist? Betrayal stung deep, not merely from Rebecca, but from my shattered trust in kin and bonds. Sleep evaded me that evening. In the quiet of my home, I strained to the wail of passing emergency vehicles, their crimson and azure flashes streaking the panes like wounds to my spirit. Adam's fading vigor haunted me, alongside those peculiar remedies and Rebecca's scheming murmurs. Brandon's haunted stare, Mario's bold revelation at just 9 years old, they all weighed heavy. I cradled my brow as if my skull might burst. Urge pulled me toward the clinic to challenge her, to howl for answers, but terror restrained me. Terror that reality eclipsed my worst fears. Terror I'd crumble under its weight. Rising, I stepped into the yard and stared at the ghostly lunar glow. Joe crossed my mind, my quiet partner, reduced to observing in silence. I yearned to confide, to seek his counsel, yet silence was all he'd offer. Solitude gripped me amid fragments of revelation gradually unveiling themselves. The following day, I awoke feeling as though an immense burden pressed down on my ribs. The usual soothing twitter of birds outside now pierced my thoughts like sharp blades. I realized this was the moment when the medical center would deliver their verdict on Adam's kidney procedure. The hints from Mario and Brandon, the audio clip, the snapshots, that mysterious vial, whirled relentlessly through my mind. Yet I couldn't bring myself to confront them. I feared that probing further might uncover a reality too devastating to endure. All I yearned for was to rescue Adam, to witness my boy restored to health, no matter if it cost me a vital organ. Still, in my core, I sensed the situation was far more tangled. The clinic had set my appointment for midday. I stepped into a compact conference space where Dr. Evans sat ready. He laid out the test reports across the surface, crisp pages crammed with figures and charts that baffled me. "Mrs. Jones," he intoned with a solemn yet resolute tone, "we've examined it all meticulously. You're the ideal match to provide Adam with a kidney. Delay much longer and his survival hangs in the balance." I gripped the hem of my shirt tightly, my skull throbbing like a hive of angry insects. "I get it," I murmured, though my words came out so faintly I wondered if they'd registered. "Doctor." Evans regarded me, his features easing into gentleness. "Would you like additional moments to consider?" he inquired. I shook my head, not from any firm resolve, but because every path seemed blocked. Rebecca, her folks, and Adam himself, they all depended on me, and I refused to let my child slip away. Through the window pane, I spotted Rebecca, arms folded defiantly. Her piercing stare signaled to her mom, Mrs. Peterson, as though she was confident I'd never back down. That subtle motion sent a shiver racing along my spine, like I was merely a piece in their calculated strategy. I longed to rise and shout about the vial, the tape, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I remained seated, ensnared in an unseen barrier without any way out. That night, I assembled everyone in our modest home. The sitting area felt packed. The faded glow from a dated lamp danced over the battered surfaces. I placed a kettle on the surface. Its minty aroma failed to lift the oppressive mood. Rebecca's parents, Mr. Collins and Mrs. Peterson, claimed the prime seats in the middle, acting like they ruled the place. Rebecca perched beside them, fingers intertwined, shooting me wary side glances to ensure I stayed committed. Adam reclined on the couch, his complexion ashen, breaths shallow and labored. Brandon lounged against the doorway, quiet but with reddened eyes, as if containing a storm of anger ready to burst. Mario curled up in one spot, clutching his tiny bag, his gaze brimming with anxiety. I inhaled sharply, my fingers shaking as I positioned the kettle. "I've reached a choice," I announced, my tone quivering yet aiming for strength. "I'll give my kidney to Adam." The space erupted in chaos. Mrs. Peterson applauded sharply and declared in a piercing pitch, "Now that's true motherhood. I figured you wouldn't fail us." Rebecca buried her face in her hands. Streams of tears flowed, but I noticed her knuckles whitening in what seemed like rehearsed emotion. "Mom," she uttered, voice catching. "I always knew your love for him ran deepest. We're so grateful." Adam met my eyes, weary and misty, yet he forced out, "Mom, you've given me another chance at life." His statement sliced into me like a blade to the heart, but then Brandon surged forward and slammed the table. The impact rattled the cups. "No way," he bellowed, fury shaking his words. "Mom, can't you tell? This is all part of some cruel scheme. She's exploiting you, and my brother, Adam." Tension thickened the air. Nothing broke the silence except a fly droning near the fixture. Rebecca sprang up, jabbing a finger toward Brandon. "What's that supposed to mean? How can you slander me like this? I only act for my spouse's sake." But Brandon held his ground, advancing with blazing intensity. Slander. What of those unmarked containers and the secretive late-night talks? "Mom, you mustn't fall for their tricks." I glanced from Brandon to Rebecca, then to Adam. I wished to intervene, urge Brandon to ease off, but nothing emerged. I simply averted my gaze, overwhelmed as if the sky itself collapsed upon me. Later that evening, I isolated myself in my tiny chamber before the antique desk. The lantern's flame wavered, casting a feeble gleam on the shaky script forming in my testament. I specified that our humble dwelling would pass to Brandon, along with a handful of my sparse treasures to Mario. Each mark felt like a wound to my spirit. Uncertainty loomed over the surgery's outcome, but I needed to secure a legacy for my dear ones. Joe remained still in his chair off to the side, observing with vacant stares. His fingers twitched as though words hovered unspoken on his lips. I turned to him, and salty drops traced my face. "Joe, I must go through with it. Rye, I need to rescue Adam." He remained silent, merely blinking as a pair of tears trickled along his hollowed cheeks. I tucked the will away into the base of an antique wooden chest filled with keepsakes from our wedding. Beyond the walls, rain hammered down relentlessly, blending with the echoes of my quiet cries. Come dawn, while the heavens stayed shrouded in darkness and mist wrapped around the narrow lanes toward the medical center, I found myself stretched out on a stretcher inside a speeding ambulance. In my grip was a modest cloth pouch holding fresh garments and a hand-stitched kerchief from that long-ago wedding ceremony. The wail of the siren pierced the air, yet I barely registered it anymore. Glimmers from the roadside lamps seeped through the glass, hazy much like my shattered hopes. I shut my eyelids and struggled for air, though my rib cage weighed like lead. This was the moment I'd give one of my kidneys to Adam, my boy. The choice was made, the document was drafted, my mind was set, yet my emotions twisted in turmoil, trapped in a dread from which escape seemed impossible. Once the vehicle halted, a caregiver wheeled the stretcher along a seemingly infinite corridor in the facility. The grating noise of the wheels against the linoleum struck my skull like repeated blows. Trailing close was Rebecca, her footfalls soft yet resolute, akin to a sentinel's stride. "Relax, Mother," she murmured in a hushed, edged tone. "Once the procedure's over, all will turn out well." From the side of my vision, I caught her gaze, a flicker of satisfaction as though she'd clinched her prize. That grin sent a shiver through me, not from the chill, but from sensing I was being maneuvered into a scheme where I served merely as a helpless piece. In the foyer, Rebecca's folks, Mr. Collins and Mrs. Peterson, waited, attired formally. He sported a dated yet crisply pressed outfit, she a vivid crimson gown, behaving as if attending a gala rather than an operation. They linked arms with Rebecca and hailed the physicians with over-the-top warmth, like lifelong acquaintances. I overheard Mrs. Peterson's booming chuckle as she told a junior surgeon, "We're grateful for your help, Doc. This kindness won't be overlooked." There I lingered, fingers tight around my pouch, an outsider in my very own tale. Adam had been ushered to a prep area already. Permission came for a brief visit prior to my entry into surgery. The compact space felt icy, his frail limbs riddled with tubes. His complexion was ashen, orbits deepened with shadows. Still, spotting me, he mustered a faint grin. "Mother, I appreciate it," he rasped, voice frayed by fatigue. I clasped his palm. It chilled me to the bone, nearly bringing fresh tears. "Adam, I'll exhaust every option to restore your health," I assured him inwardly. Yet my words quavered, as if seeking to reassure my own doubts. Gazing into his eyes, I noted unwavering faith and pondered, am I choosing wisely or wagering my existence on a mystery I scarcely grasp? Abruptly, Brandon burst through the door, palm still smudged with oil from his job. He panted heavily, his top drenched in perspiration, suggesting he dashed a marathon. "Mother, hold off," he urged, voice cracking as he seized my arms. "Please refuse the donation. This feels off." I met Brandon's stare. His bloodshot orbs burned with fury and worry. I longed to explain my resolve, that abandoning Adam to death was unthinkable. But speech failed me. Instead, I pressed my hand over his, gave a soft squeeze, and permitted the attendant to guide me onward. Brandon stood frozen, his cries pursuing, "Mother, hear me out." I refused to glance back, terrified that one look at his face might shatter my composure. The corridor stretched endlessly, air sharp with chill. The antiseptic odor assaulted my senses, stirring queasiness. A detached announcement crackled from the speakers. "Prep for renal procedure in Theater 3. They directed me to a prep area where staff fitted a head covering and face shield. Donning that stark azure robe underscored the impending sacrifice of my flesh. Peering into the glass, I confronted my emaciated features, shadowed by fatigue. Internally, I questioned, "Mary, is this truly the path? Are you certain?" But visions of Adam, frail in his bed, flooded my thoughts. I clenched my jaw and pressed forward. As we proceeded, I glimpsed Rebecca and Mrs. Peterson beside a pane of glass, conversing with a stranger in a dark coat and brimmed hat obscuring his features, matching the snapshot Brandon once revealed. Rebecca passed him a sealed packet, which he swiftly concealed in his coat. My pulse raced wildly. Icy perspiration trailed my spine. What scheme unfolded? What secrets lay within? Urge surged to halt, to yell for clarity. Yet the attendant steadied my elbow, ushering me into the surgical suite. Within, stark illumination blasted my sight, forcing narrowed eyes. Dr. Evans stood ready, his expression grave yet composed. "All preparations are complete, Mrs. Jones," he remarked in a solemn tone. "Simply unwind." I gave a slight nod, though my frame remained rigid. The attendant affixed sensors across my torso, and the steady rhythm of the cardiac device pulsed rhythmically, each pulse echoing like an ominous alert. Rebecca materialized beyond the partition. She leaned her cheek to the pane and gestured urgently at the documents clutched by another attendant. Grasping the pen with shaky fingers, I scrawled my name, the ink smudging across the sheet. As I committed to the page, it seemed like I was sealing my fate in a fatal decree. Staring at the smeared mark, my thoughts drifted to the testament I'd drafted the previous evening, visions of Brandon, Mario, and I pondered if this might mark the final moment of awareness. Right as the physician prepared to administer the sedative, my pulse raced wildly. A chill perspiration drenched my spine. Shutting my eyes, I struggled for air, but visions of Adam, Brandon, Mario, and Rebecca whirled through my mind. Memories surfaced of Mario's capture on that unmarked vial alongside Brandon's image. I yearned to halt everything, yet I was powerless. I'd progressed too deeply. I'd affixed my signature. I'd stepped into this chamber. All I could manage was to recline there, gripped by dread that overwhelmed my core. Then, precisely as the attendant poised the needle for the sedative, a thunderous impact shook the entire space. The entrance flew ajar. The grating squeal of the fittings tore through the atmosphere. The medical staff jolted in surprise. Several spun sharply, their expressions laced with alarm. Mario charged in like a compact tempest. His athletic shoes bore remnants of dirt. His academy attire hung rumpled, and his young torso rose and fell rapidly as he panted. He clutched his worn-out mobile device with its cracked display like a priceless treasure. An attendant dashed behind him, yelling frantically, "Youngster, this area is off limits. Heavens, halt right there." Yet Mario pressed on, undeterred. He dashed directly to my side, his wide, circular gaze brimming with terror, yet ignited by a resolve I'd never witnessed in one so young. "Grandma," he uttered in a quivering tone, yet so distinct it halted the room's activity. "I need to explain to all why Dad truly requires your organ." His declaration hit like an eruption in my skull. I caught my breath. My heartbeat appeared to falter. The surgical suite plunged into utter quiet, pierced solely by the rhythmic chirps of the vital signs monitor, now amplified as though intent on piercing the hush. A close-by surgeon let surgical clamps slip from his grasp. The clangor against the tiled surface rang out overwhelmingly, a piercing slice through the charged ambience. Dr. Evans, the lead operative, lifted a palm, directing the group to pause. He furrowed his brow, yet his delivery remained steady and authoritative. "Allow the child to express himself. Whatever message you bear, deliver it immediately." I regarded Mario. I noted his small fingers squeezing the phone, his complexion ashen, but his stare vivid as if burdened by universal gravity. "Leave." From outside the barrier, Rebecca pounded on the portal with fury, causing the surface to vibrate. "Ignore that boy," she cried in a piercing, nearly frenzied pitch. "He's merely a youngster. It'll become clear." But Rebecca's stare had lost its frosty edge. It quivered with anxiety, as though the concealed truth she'd labored to bury teetered on revelation. Mario averted his eyes from his mother. He approached me and, with unsteady palms, activated the playback on the device. An audio segment commenced. It featured Rebecca's murmur, soft but piercing like a blade into my spirit. Post-procedure, the lab outcomes will align flawlessly. Rest assured that elderly lady won't resist. The chamber appeared to detonate into muteness. My veins felt frozen, breath lodged in my windpipe. Dr. Evans pivoted sharply toward me, his gaze expanded in astonishment. "Cease," he commanded in a tone honed like a blade. "Halt every procedure at once." An attendant swiftly retracted the injector. The rest remained frozen, hesitant to stir. Rebecca, separated by the divider, emitted a wail and struck the entrance anew. "That's false. She fabricated it entirely. This boy's being coerced." But her tone fractured, as if she doubted her denial. I turned to Mario and watched him dissolve into sobs. Yet he adhered to the mobile as though it represented the ultimate proof to rescue me. "There's footage as well," he declared, voice strangled, "of Mom and the grandparents discussing drug sales." He initiated the clip, and the scene flickered on the compact display. Rebecca and Mrs. Peterson in the lot, trading a packet with the mysterious figure I'd encountered earlier. Mrs. Peterson's words echoed. "Following this surgery, we'll possess sufficient info to market the treatment overseas. These funds will transform our lives." I remained supine, sight hazy from weeping, sensing a blend of revulsion and liberation. Revulsion at the reality I desperately evaded, now laid bare for all, and liberation since I could at last cease deceiving myself. Brandon stormed in from the corridor, cheeks flushed with rage. "That's sufficient," he bellowed, lunging toward the transparent barrier to confront Rebecca. "You poisoned him! You figured we'd all look the other way!" Before a soul could move, Brandon lifted his palm and struck her across the face. The sharp crack reverberated through the corridor, triggering Mrs. Peterson's piercing cry. "How could you strike my child?" Yet Brandon pressed on. He jabbed a finger toward Rebecca, his tone quivering with fury. "What drugs have you slipped him? What harm did you inflict on my sibling Adam?" Rebecca pressed a palm against her face. Rivulets of tears traced down her cheeks, yet in her gaze there was no trace of remorse, just the terror of exposure for someone caught red-handed. "You're insane!" she shrieked, pivoting to Dr. Evans. "Ignore their accusations. They're tarnishing my name." But Dr. Evans offered no reply, his complexion drained of color as he spoke to a nearby nurse. "This isn't an operation anymore. It's turned into a criminal matter. Summon the authorities immediately." One nurse dashed off while the rest exchanged bewildered glances. I remained sprawled there, sensing my reality shattering. Salty drops slid over my skin, but I let them be. I glanced at Mario, my young grandson, who had fearlessly stormed the surgical suite to shield me. I eyed Brandon, my junior boy, who'd fought tooth and nail to safeguard me. And my mind drifted to Adam, my offspring, resting in the adjacent chamber, oblivious that his devoted spouse had turned against him. I lingered in that spot, allowing the sobs to pour, letting the revelation sink deep into my core. Right then, I realized the shift was irreversible. The reality had erupted like a barrier forced open, impossible to conceal any longer. The once sterile and hushed operating theater had morphed into a turbulent war zone. The disoriented staff traded uncertain looks, unsure of their next step. Dr. Evans creased his brow, his piercing stare sweeping over the group as though striving to impose calm amid the tempest. I stayed flat on my back, my sight hazy from the flood in my eyes, yet glued to the unfolding drama. The disclosure Mario had unleashed acted like flames, incinerating the last shreds of faith I held. Rebecca, reeling from Brandon's blow, gripped her jaw and screeched in a high-pitched wail. "How could you lay a hand on me? I do it all for my spouse." Weepy trails marked her features, but the alarm in her stare stood out plain. It wasn't the hurt of an innocent partner falsely blamed, but the dread of a guilty soul unmasked. She whirled toward her folks, clutching at Mrs. Peterson's attire, her words strangled. "I committed no offense. I only aimed to rescue Adam. Father, mother, speak up." But Mr. Collins and Mrs. Peterson froze in place, their visages ashen, words failing them. Mrs. Peterson, often so sly and domineering, now merely balled her fists, gnawing her lip to stifle the shakes. Abruptly, Mrs. Peterson slammed her walking stick against the ground. The hollow thud of timber on flooring rang out, and she thrust it straight at me. "You had the nerve to twist your grandson into spinning tales against us, you wicked hag." Her barbs pierced me like daggers. I yearned to shout back, to declare I'd swayed no one, that it was her offspring who'd shattered our kin. But a knot choked my windpipe, silencing me. I simply stared at her, trapped in a shadowy corner where decades of my devotion got crushed underfoot. Mr. Collins, Rebecca's dad, murmured urgently to a familiar physician standing close, in a hushed yet rushed manner. "Carry on with the procedure, please. We'll handle the rest. We need this wrapped up." He passed a sealed packet to the doctor's grasp, but Dr. Evans approached at once, his tone frosty as frost. "Justice rules here, not bribes." He seized the packet, flung it aside, and directed a nurse. "Seal the entrances. Nobody exits. I'll notify the administration without delay." His strides carried a resolute echo, signaling total disarray. From the corridor, Brandon charged into the surgical area, brushing past a nurse's efforts to halt him. He seized my arms, his eyes bloodshot, and bellowed, "Mother, hold off on the organ gift. It's their scheme through and through. She tainted my brother. Can't you tell, Adam?" Brandon's tone shook with wrath and sorrow. I met his stare and caught the anguish of a child defending his parent. I longed to respond, to soothe him, but words escaped me. I just lay motionless, the ground seeming to give way below. From the adjoining prep area, Adam's frail and muddled call drifted over. "What's the commotion? Why the shouting?" He struggled to rise, gasping for air. The tubes in his vein quivered with his shift. Hearing my boy's plea tore my soul apart. Adam was clueless. He had no inkling that his beloved partner, the one he relied on, had pulled the entire household into a sinister plot. I ached to rush to his side, embrace him, assure him all would mend. But paralysis gripped me. I could only remain prone, weeping endlessly, ripped between my affection for Adam and the grim revelation now exposed. Mario, positioned at my side, dissolved into heaving cries, yet he raised the phone anyway, his voice thick with emotion as he murmured, "I've got one more clip." The moment captured my mother administering the drugs to my grandparents. He hit play, and the footage flickered to life on that tiny display. There was Rebecca and Mrs. Peterson in the parking area, handing off something to the mysterious stranger. Mrs. Peterson's words rang out, sharp and icy. "If the procedure goes well, we'll move the drugs overseas. That cash will clean up every bit of our illicit earnings." The room went dead quiet. A nurse clamped a hand over her lips, her stare filled with shock. Dr. Evans stood rigid, clutching the folder like it was the only thing holding back his anger. Rebecca, frantic, darted forward to wrestle the device from Mario's grasp, aiming to smash it down. "That's not real!" she shouted, her tone cracking. But Brandon moved quicker. He snatched it from her reach and shoved her back, sending Rebecca tumbling to the ground. One of her stilettos came loose, clattering across the tiles like the closing punctuation on the deception she'd spun. "Keep quiet!" Brandon bellowed, his cheeks flushed with rage. "You really thought you could deceive us all. What exactly did you inflict on my brother Adam?" Rebecca sat there on the floor, her locks disheveled, though a spark of defiance lingered in her eyes. "I didn't harm anyone. You're accusing me falsely." Security from the hospital arrived next. 2 officers in crisp uniforms stepped in, faces stern. They moved toward Rebecca, Mr. Collins, and Mrs. Peterson without pause, leaving no chance for protest. Mrs. Peterson gripped her cane shakily, muttering curses. "Betrayer! You've ruined this family!" She jabbed a finger my way, but her words faltered, as if she sensed the end had come. They restrained Rebecca tightly. She twisted against their hold. "Release me! I haven't committed any crime." Yet her expression now mirrored the panic of a trapped animal. I remained still on the table, my skin chilled, but my gaze fixed wide, absorbing the revelation playing out. As the surgery room doors shut after the authorities, the outcries from Rebecca and her folks lingered in the corridor. For me, though, they dissolved like echoes of a vanishing dream. Rebecca's cries persisted, ragged and pleading. I was advancing medical research. No one gets it. But silence met her words. Mr. Collins and Mrs. Peterson, who had once lounged so smugly in our home, now shuffled along with downcast faces, guided quietly away. I rested on the operating slab, my frame still quivering, yet the tremor stemmed not from terror anymore. A wave of release washed over me, as though I'd escaped an invisible prison. Dr. Evans approached. His expression stayed somber, but his eyes held a gentler light. "Mrs. Jones," he intoned deeply, "we've halted the operation. Adam will shift to another option. Dialysis paired with innovative therapies. You endangered yourself getting ready for this, but you've preserved his life and your honor." I met his look. Streams of tears traced my face, but I let them flow. "Thank you, doctor," I breathed softly, my words faint yet genuine. Whether I'd truly upheld my honor, I couldn't say. But after months of strain, I finally sensed air filling my lungs, real and deep. Brandon hurried to my side and eased me upright. He clasped my fingers firmly. His stare was resolute, laced with sorrow. "You've still got me, Mom," he uttered, his throat tight. "I'll watch over you from here out. That's my word." I gripped his hand back, sensing the reassuring heat from his calloused, oil-marked palm. Peering into Brandon's eyes, I glimpsed the resolve of a boy ready to shoulder any burden for his parent. "You make me so proud, my boy," I murmured, and fresh tears spilled. Brandon stayed silent. He simply pulled me into a fierce embrace. In that hold amid the wreckage of our kin, I discovered a measure of solace. They moved Adam to a healing ward. When I stepped in, he reclined there, complexion ashen, tubes still snaking into his veins. He regarded me with bloodshot eyes and murmured faintly, "Mom, did my wife really plot against me all along?" His query pierced me like a blade. I approached, settled on the mattress edge, and drew him close. My sobs dampened his medical attire. "Adam, my dear boy," I managed through a constricted throat. "I can't pinpoint when this mess began, but I swear no one will injure you again." Adam bowed his head. Droplets slid along his gaunt features. "Mom, I messed up," he confided softly. "I failed to shield you, and you endured far too much because of me." I enveloped him more snugly, realizing that amid the chaos, it was merely us, bound together after the tempest. Over the ensuing week, the papers blared the story. Local clinic dismantled for narcotics scheme. The bold print declared it. Reports detailed a network of physicians and drug experts, with Rebecca, Mr. Collins, and Mrs. Peterson at the core. They'd experimented with banned substances on folks like Adam, masking it behind the organ swap to gather intel for a global syndicate. Those revelations stirred revulsion and grief in me. I pictured Rebecca. I recalled the moments when she brought me meals, the tender phrases she uttered that I now realized were all lies. My thoughts turned to Adam and the endless months he endured in agony, unaware that his very spouse was endangering his life. Adam started his dialysis sessions and began taking his prescribed drugs. Gradually, his condition got better, bit by bit. One evening, he grasped my hand, bowed his head low, and murmured with a voice thick with emotion, "Mom, I was so naive. I put my faith in Rebecca and nearly caused you to forfeit it all." I gently ran my fingers through his hair, just as I did when he was little, and reassured him, "My boy, the key thing is you're with us now. Nothing else matters to me." Yet deep inside, a wound lingered, not only from Rebecca's deception, but from how I'd allowed myself to teeter on the edge of life and death without ever questioning it. I returned to my modest home, where Joe remained still in his wheelchair. I settled next to him and shared every detail, from Mario's secret recording to the moment Rebecca was led away in cuffs. I'm not sure how much he grasped, but as I wrapped up my account, I noticed his eyelids flutter, and a pair of tears traced paths down his hollowed face. I clasped his hand tightly, and for the first time in ages, I sensed a faint reply from him, a slight pressure, like he was conveying that he got it. Sobs overcame me, not out of sorrow, but from the certainty that amid it all, he was still mine. My family was intact. Mario turned into the neighborhood's pint-sized champion. The day he returned, he dashed straight to me, wrapped his arms around my neck, and breathed softly, "Grandma, forgive me for waiting so long to say something, but I made it just in time to rescue you." I chuckled amid my weeping, pulling the child close and savoring the comfort of his little frame. "You're the boldest soul I've ever met," I replied, tousling his locks. Mario grinned, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him in what felt like forever. Gazing into his eyes, I could tell his purity endured, even if it was marred by the horrors he'd observed. I vowed silently to shield Mario, to ensure he had a youth no one could snatch away. On that final evening, I perched in my tiny bedroom beneath the dim glow of the kerosene lamp. I flipped open my worn journal and penned the closing entries. Family ties aren't always bound by blood. Often it's honesty that reveals who truly earns that title. I'd forfeited much, yet I'd rediscovered my true self. I shut the journal, set the pencil aside, and tuned into the patter of rain on the patio awning. A peculiar peace washed over me, as though the turmoil had cleared, unveiling a serene horizon. Peering through the glass, I watched the faint moonbeams bathing the yard in silver, and I understood that though the journey forward might stretch on, I'd never again surrender my sight. I'd reclaimed my inner resilience, the one treasure no one could strip away. The tale you've heard is altered in details like names and locations to safeguard those involved. We're sharing this not to condemn, but in the wish that it prompts thought and pause. Countless moms endure quietly within their walls. How many more? I genuinely ponder, if you stood in my shoes, what path would you take? Would you stay quiet for harmony's sake, or summon the nerve to confront it all and seize back your say? I'd love your thoughts, for each narrative is a flame that might guide another. May God grant blessings always. I'm certain bravery paves the road to brighter tomorrows. As we wrap up, here's a pair of the channel's favorite tales on the closing frame. They're bound to captivate you.